Hello, I'm Avalanka. Actually, I'm American. I don't speak with an Australian accent. I'm Alvalanker, but I love Australia. You guys are some of the greatest allies America will ever have. Let's play some video games. I'm going to play some STARCRAFT 2 and listen to some music and maybe listen to some World War II documentaries and some interesting history stuff and some war related stuff. We're just going total war today. Total war. The world is at war. We're going to be at war too in cyberspace, playing video games. And we're not even going to kill real people. That's the difference. We don't kill real people here. We do it digitally. We kill AI. So this is a peaceful war where only computers get destroyed and the humans prevail and get to watch and enjoy the entertainment of computers being killed. Alright, let's get the show on the road. Check out my music. Alvalanker on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, iTunes, Amazon Music, SoundCloud. Just Google Alvalanker and check me out. And check out the No Filter podcast also, which is one of my favorite podcasts. And I'm on there sometimes. Search No Filter with Andrew and Friends. Alright, so here we go.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Herr Roosevelt verlangt endlich die Bereitwilligkeit, ihm die Zusicherung zu geben, dass die deutschen Streitkräfte das Staatsgebiet folgender unabhängiger Nationen nicht angreifen, und er nennt Finnland, Lettland, Litauen, Estland, Norwegen, Schweden, Dänemark, Niederlande, Belgien, Großbritannien, Irland, Frankreich, Portugal, Spanien, die Schweiz, Liechtenstein, Luxemburg, Polen, Ungarn, Rumänien, Jugoslawien, Russland, Bulgarien, Türkei, Irak, Arabien, Syrien, Palästina, Ägypten.
Fight in France, we shall fight on the seas and oceans, we shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air, we shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender, and if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. All our hearts go out to the fighter pilots whose brilliant actions we see with our own eyes day after day. I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not be found unworthy of our victory if after toil and tribulation it is granted to us. For the rest, we have to gain the victory. That is our task.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Roosevelt verlangt endlich die Bereitwilligkeit, in die Zusicherung zu geben, dass die deutschen Streitkräfte das Staatsgebiet vollender unabhängiger Nationen nicht angreifen, und er nennt Finnland, Lettland, Litauen, Estland, Norwegen, Schweden, Dänemark, Niederlande, Belgien, Großbritannien, Irland, Frankreich, Portugal, Spanien, die Schweiz, Liechtenstein, Luxemburg, Polen, Ungarn, Rumänien, Jugoslawien, Russland, Bulgarien, Türkei, Irak, Arabien, Syrien, Palästina, Ägypten.
Fight in France, we shall fight on the seas and oceans, we shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air, we shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender, and if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island, or a large part of it, were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. All our hearts go out to the fighter pilots, whose brilliant actions we see with our own eyes day after day. I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not be found unworthy of our victory, if after toil and tribulation it is granted to us. For the rest, we have to gain the victory. That is our task.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
In the 13th year of this century, on the 25th of December, the birthday of Christ, in a square on the edge of Vienna, there was a painter selling postcards. Staying in a cold room without heating, in a hotel on the same square, was a Russian revolutionary. One of the men was Schicklgruber, Adolf Hitler. The other was Joseph Stalin. Who would have believed then that these two men would several years later decide the fate of the planet?
No one could have foreseen that barely 20 years after the meeting that never was, Hitler and Stalin would preside over warring ideologies. Their final struggle would tear Europe apart, lead to the deaths of millions, and reshape the political landscape of the whole world. They were dedicated to each other's destruction, yet each seemed to need the other. They studied each other's careers, respected, even admired each other's cruelty, and used each other to further their own ambitions. In a century of bloodshed, Hitler and Stalin stand out in dreadful symmetry as beacons of evil. Beyond the events that shaped them, did it take a special kind of personality to do what they did? Were the 20th century's greatest enemies, in some fundamental way, the same? Both Hitler and Stalin were outsiders. They came from the far reaches of the great empires into which they were born. Both were later disdained as provincial, vulgar upstarts, and both spoke with strong regional accents all their lives. Joseph Stalin was born in 1878 in Gori in the Republic of Georgia, deep in the Caucasus Mountains, where he's still a hero, despite having turned his back on his native land. He was born Joseph Dugashvili. Stalin, Russian for Man of Steel, was the revolutionary name he took in 1912. While no trace remains of Hitler's birthplace to discourage unwelcome pilgrimage, Stalin's childhood home is still a shrine, encased in a marble facade with a museum next door. Proof, as Stalin said, that victors are never judged. Pilgrims have come in their thousands to pay homage.
A house in Gori. The great Stalin, leader of the working people of the whole world, was born here and lived in this house. From all over the Soviet Union, from all corners of the world, people from different countries come to this spot with a message of love and gratitude.
Joseph Stalin was the son of a cobbler. As a child, he suffered from smallpox, which scarred his face for life. His left arm was withered, the result of an early accident. He grew to be only 5'4" tall, something he was to hide with platform soles. Stalin grew up in a violent household. A childhood friend wrote,
"Undeserved and severe beatings made him as hard and heartless as the father was. Since all people in authority seemed to Stalin to be like his father, there soon arose in him a vengeful feeling against all the people standing above him."
Adolf Hitler, 10 years Stalin's junior, also had a far from idyllic childhood. He was bright but lazy and loved to dream of a life of adventure and excitement. From an early age, he devoured books about war and soldiering. Hitler's parents are buried in Lambach in Austria. Their grave is tended to this day. His father, Alois, was a customs official. He wanted Adolf to follow him into the civil service. The boy was horrified, telling his father he wished to become an artist. "Artist? No, never as long as I live," was the reply. Like Stalin's father, Alois Hitler terrorized his family.
Der Vater war tatsächlich doch ziemlich gewalttätig und hat beide Buben, auch den Halbbruder.
His father was really very violent-tempered and used to beat and hit both boys, Hitler's half-brother as well.
Und
It is clear that Hitler had an extreme aversion to his father.
It was his mother Clara whom Hitler loved passionately. He carried a picture of her with him until his death in the ruins of Berlin. She pampered him as a baby and spoiled him as he grew up. Hitler said of her, "She lived only for her husband and children. They were her entire universe, but she gave a son to Germany." When he came to power, Hitler declared the day of her death the day of honor for the German mother. In 1939, Hitler, Chancellor of Greater Germany, revisited the scenes of his childhood in Austria and the school he attended in Fischlham. In later years, his childhood became tremendously important to him. Hitler used his past to explain what he had become. He said he had been a natural leader of boys and a gifted student. In fact, as an adolescent, he failed badly at school and was twice held back because of poor grades. In 1905, his father dead, Hitler dropped out of school in Linz to fulfill his dream of being a painter. His mother used her pension to support him as he affected the life of the romantic artist. Stalin's mother, Ekaterina, was less indulgent of her son, but just as devoted, sending hampers of Georgian delicacies to him until her death. When Stalin once complained about her beating him as a boy, she replied, "That's why you turned out so well." She wanted him to be a priest and sent him to a Russian Orthodox seminary. It was to change him forever.
He owed a very, very great deal to his mother, because ever afterwards in his life, he was literate in Russian. He thought in systematic terms, as the church had taught him to do. And he always kept in touch with this lady, even when he was in Moscow. He always expressed himself very lovingly towards his mother. He was a very emotional man.
In the repressive atmosphere of the seminary in Tbilisi, the Georgian capital, Stalin grew politically aware.
I became a Marxist on account of my humble upbringing and the rigorous intolerance and Jesuitical discipline that crushed me so cruelly.
Instead of the Bible, he read smuggled copies of Marxist pamphlets. And instead of Christianity, he embraced the new communist faith. His daughter Svetlana was to say that it was here that he came to believe that men were coarse and intolerant, and that they lied and intrigued. In 1899, aged 20, Stalin was already involved in underground communist activities. He left the seminary and dedicated his life to revolution.
It didn't take very much to push someone into objecting to the social and economic conditions in which most people had to live in that empire. But few would-be revolutionaries became quite as committed to authoritarianism, to hierarchy, to discipline,
the minerals
to
have up and gone.
Class war, to revenge of the poor against the rich, as did Stalin.
Stalin had all the brutal commitment of a terrorist. He robbed banks, incited violent demonstrations, and beat up his opponents. He was arrested and exiled to Siberia 7 times. He later described his time in exile.
I hung around mostly with criminals. I remember we used to stop at the saloons in town and drink up every kopeck we had. The criminals were nice salt-of-the-earth types, but there were lots of rats among the political convicts.
In Siberia, Joseph Stalin developed the characteristic which was to be one of the essentials of his rise to power: absolute self-sufficiency. He relied on no one but himself, never sharing his inner feelings with his comrades. "A good dose of exile in Siberia never hurt me," he later said. Out of exile for a time in 1905, the wary, watchful provincial radical met the man who would transform his fortunes, Lenin, the Bolshevik leader. Lenin was immediately taken with a rough Georgian.
Finished learn mineral field
Stalin
depleted.
appealed to Lenin.
Our allies' base is under attack.
Firstly, Stalin was one of
Friendo's
the few
base is under
very
attack.
able organizers of the Bolshevik Party within Russia. Stalin had a lot of experience in revolutionary underground work, and it was quite natural that Lenin, looking around for people who could be entrusted with responsible functions within Russia, selected
Mineral
Stalin.
field depleted.
Hitler had no such sense of direction. In 1908, he left the small-town Austria of his youth and arrived in Vienna to try his luck as an artist. The years that followed were for him what exile in Siberia was to Stalin. I owe it to that period that I grew
have
hard,
up and
he
gone.
later said. Although Hitler saw himself as an artist, his talent was limited. He applied twice to the Viennese Academy of Arts. Twice he was
Nukes!
rejected. It was a bitter blow. When I received the news, he said, it struck me like a bolt from the blue. Hitler squandered his mother's inheritance loafing
Our
around in
allies
Vienna.
are being attacked.
Spent much time in the Austrian parliament, mainly to keep warm, but also to drink in the rabid nationalism and anti-Semitism current at the time. What he witnessed there gave him a lifelong contempt for democracy. The failed artist sank fast and was forced to seek shelter in a home for vagrants, still open today. It was a crushing humiliation. Shy and solitary, he sat in the same corner of the writing room day after day, drawing and painting.
The upgrade is done.
He never had a real conversation with anyone in the hostel. When he opened his mouth, it was to make a speech, loudly, passionately, speaking down to people and carrying on as if he would never stop.
Hey, base is under
The
attack.
other
Base
people in
is
the
under
hostel
attack.
would laugh at him. He was a peculiar figure. He was an extreme example of a loner who nonetheless read a lot and learned a lot.
In winter, Hitler took work shoveling snow, but lacked the coat and the strength to carry on. His destitution didn't do what it had for so many other poor and hopeless men in Vienna and drive him into the arms of the Marxists. Instead, he developed a horror of communism, believing that a man must succeed by his own efforts. To that end, Hitler tried to make a living selling his paintings of Vienna as illustrated postcards. His partners in this doomed enterprise were mostly Jews.
In dieser Gesellschaft hat sich ganz offensichtlich.
In this kind of atmosphere, he quite clearly latched onto the Jews. He developed close friendships with them and worked
Forces are
together
under
with them.
attack.
This, however, had nothing to do with his ideology. He had quite clearly learned the slogans of the anti-Semites in Vienna more or less by heart. He had a phenomenal memory.
Our allies are being
He didn't
attacked.
just learn these slogans by heart. He learned an awful lot else.
Diese Parolen auswendig gelernt, sondern sehr vieles andere auch.
The outbreak of war in 1914 was a turning point for Adolf Hitler, who, in contrast to Stalin, had grown into adulthood a drifter. In August that year, he was captured on film by the photographer Hoffmann in Munich, his new home, rejoicing at the declaration of war. He rushed to enlist.
I am not ashamed to acknowledge that I sank down on my knees and thanked heaven for the favor of being allowed to live at such a time.
Hitler was a regimental runner, taking messages from trench to trench, often under heavy fire. Twice wounded, once gassed, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, a high distinction. The war changed him forever.
It created an extraordinary moral blunting, I think, in Hitler. He saw death all around him. He had friends who were killed every single day. I think it created in him almost a desire to steep himself in the atmosphere of death and destruction. And I think because he had very clear links between that extraordinary environment, and his willingness later on to embrace policies of annihilation.
Hey, they're attacking our base. Base is under attack.
I learned that life is a cruel struggle and has no other object than the preservation of the species, Hitler wrote. For him, morality had no place. Only the survival of the fittest, the German master race, would matter now.
Our allies' base is under attack.
Joseph Stalin, unlike Adolf Hitler, did not fight in the First World War. He was rejected by the Russian army as unfit because of his damaged arm and as a political troublemaker. Freed from military service, he pursued his political ambition. He had a clear sense of his historic role, a revolutionary working alongside the party leader, Lenin. In 1917, he went to St. Petersburg after the overthrow of the Tsar in the February Revolution. He took over Pravda, the Bolshevik newspaper,
complete.
And moved into a flat with the Alleluia family. In those days, in contrast to Hitler, Stalin was relatively relaxed with women. The daughter of the
Mineral
family
field
soon caught his eye.
Friendo's base is under attack. Hey, help your friend. Base is under attack.
In this flat, that his romance
Our army
unfolded
be
with
scrapped.
Nadezhda, Alleluia's younger daughter.
Upgrade. Vespine
In time,
Geyser
she was to
exhausted.
become Stalin's wife.
Nadezhda was 16 when Stalin arrived at the flat. They married 2 years later. She was a music student and appealed to the Georgian revolutionaries' romantic side.
I know that she loved Tchaikovsky mainly. Those children's pieces of Tchaikovsky. The girls were also very fond of Byron's poetry, and so in one of the rooms they hung a portrait of
The
Byron.
minerals have up and gone.
Stalin, too, loved Byron's work. As a young man, he had published his own romantic poetry.
When the mountains spring, dammed up, once more sweeps the path away and gushes, and the forest, woken by the breeze, begins to toss and rustle. Then I, too, oppressed, find the mist of sadness breaks.
Mineral field depleted.
And instantly recedes, and hopes of the good life unfold in my unhappy heart.
Our allies' base is under attack.
Joseph Stalin and Nadezhda Allelueva fell in love. Lenin, who had come to value Stalin, was disappointed.
Lenin said to Stalin, I want you to marry my sister. Stalin said, I'm
Our
sorry, but I
allies'
have a
base
wedding
is under
with
attack.
Nadezhda Alleluieva. What, said Lenin? How? Just like that. How did you find the time? Stalin replied, we somehow found the time and got married.
Despite the failed marriage bid, Stalin's intimacy with Lenin grew. He had hidden the Bolshevik leader
Well,
in the
there's no more
Alleluia
gas with
flat
this one.
before the October Revolution and helped him escape to Finland.
The minerals have up and gone.
Once there was a time where they had to escape. The police wanted to catch Lenin and shoot him as a spy. Granny said that he had to be shaved so as to disguise him, and she wanted to do it. But Stalin said, I'm a man, I'll shave him better. So he did it, and put a cap on Lenin like the one I'm wearing now. Grandpa gave him a coat and took him to the station.
Our allies are being attacked.
On the 24th of October 1917, Lenin returned by train to St. Petersburg and took personal charge of the revolution. Stalin had failed to grasp the pace of events, and throughout this crucial period spent his time behind his desk at the offices of Pravda. Later feature films rectified this blemish, placing Stalin at Lenin's side throughout.
Mineral field depleted.
On the 26th of October 1917, the Winter Palace, the final bastion of the provisional government, was stormed. In the civil war which followed, Lenin relied on Stalin to do his dirty work.
There were no moral thresholds. for Stalin. And
Hey,
Lenin knew about
help
this.
your friends.
He promoted Stalin. He knew what
The
sort of
minerals
person,
have
or
up
he
and
thought
gone.
He knew what sort of person he was. He gave him all of the
Your forces
dangerous
are under attack.
troubleshooting roles after the October Revolution in the Civil War. Problem on one of the Civil War fronts, the man to send there was Stalin.
As Lenin's enforcer, Stalin seemed to have found his role. It was only in the chaos following the First War that Hitler found his. Germany's defeat in 1918 was a devastating blow for him. He heard the news while in hospital after being gassed.
I had not wept since the day I stood at my mother's grave, but now I couldn't help it. What was all my pain compared with this misery?
Defeat now gave Hitler the strongest characteristic he was to share with Stalin, an overwhelming sense of political mission.
Hatred grew in me.
Your forces are under
Hatred
attack.
for those responsible for this deed.
The
In the
minerals
days
have
that
up
followed,
and gone.
my own fate became
Mineral
known to me.
field depleted.
He took Germany's defeat so personally. I mean, many people did, of course. feel
Our
a
allies
sense
are
of
being
personal
attacked.
loss. But Hitler, having drifted so long in his early life, suddenly had this extraordinary power to marry himself to Germany, his German history, and to Germany's future, and gradually began to develop the idea that he alone was able to bridge this divide between this sort of sense of personal, deep personal loss and the salvation of Germany.
Hitler, like millions, sought scapegoats everywhere. He blamed Marxists, Jews, democratic politicians. He was Germany's misery made flesh. In 1919, he found a home and a voice in the extreme right German Workers' Party in Munich. From the very first, he electrified with his oratory, despite his Austrian accent. He'd always suspected he had a talent for rhetoric. Now it was confirmed. I could speak, he said. He began in committee rooms and beer halls. The effect was always the same. Goodness, he's got a gob on him, the leader of the Workers' Party said. We could use him.
The minerals have up and gone.
My father heard Hitler speak for the first time in a Munich beer keller in 1920. My mother told me that he came home in high spirits. He was usually depressed, but had shaken off his depression. He said that he had met the man who would lead Germany to greatness once again.
Spellbound by Hitler's oratory, many thousands joined the fledgling party, and in less than a year Hitler had made it his own. He used all his artistic skills to create the party's image, introducing the heraldry of the swastika and the array of banners and symbols which would later reach their apotheosis at the Nuremberg rallies. He translated his own bitterness into the party's ideology, railing against enemies within and without, socialists, communists, Jews and capitalists who had worked together to destroy Germany. And he insisted on complete obedience to himself as Führer, the leader. Hitler was Nazism, and Nazism was Hitler. It was an extraordinary transition for the man who only 10 years before had been a homeless wastrel.
Hey, help your friends.
Both Stalin and Hitler, of course, were outsiders. Stalin was a Georgian, and Hitler, of course, was an Austrian. A point I think that is so often overlooked when one talks about the impact of Hitler on Germany. But they were, in that sense, like Napoleon, outsiders who had something to do. They cut themselves off from their roots, and in that kind of rootless situation, had to tie themselves to something else. Stalin tied himself to Lenin's revolution. Hitler tied himself to the salvation of the German people.
By 1923, Hitler was confident enough
Our
to
army
seize
is
power
being
in Munich
attacked.
by means of a putsch, a violent coup. It was a fiasco. As the German stormtroopers marched into the Odeon trap, they were fired at. Confident in
nuclear
the
launch
Nazi
is
propaganda,
detected.
Hitler fled, suffering a dislocated shoulder, and took shelter in his press officer's house.
Mineral field depleted.
You can't take me alive.
Hey,
And
help
my
your
mother
friends.
then slowly spoke to him, Hitler, you can't do that. Think of all the people who have believed in you and still believe in you, you cannot leave them in the lurch.
Help your friends!
And having thought it along this line, she got up to him and quietly took away the pistol and dropped it into a great bin of flour.
Hitler was imprisoned in Landsberg jail near Munich. Once again, he suffered intense depression after the failure of the putsch. But his sentence gave him the opportunity to set out his personal vision in a book.
Our allies
Mein
are
Kampf,
being attacked.
My Struggle.
It tells us a great deal, not just about Hitler's geopolitics or his racism, which is well known, but about Hitler's general view of human nature, his view of the political process, his view of what makes societies work, how they hold together. There's no blueprint in Mein Kampf.
Help your friends!
The general worldview that Hitler sketches there dominates his thinking right the way through to the Second World War.
Upgrade complete!
Stalin, meanwhile, already had his hands on the levers of
Your
power
forces
and
are
was
under
seeking
attack.
to tighten his grip. But in a world where Lenin was the star, he had to veil his ambition, unlike Hitler, who made a virtue of his craving for power. Lenin appreciated Stalin's mixture of cunning and ruthlessness. That cook, he said, will concoct nothing but peppery dishes. The skills Stalin showed in dealing with party matters led to his appointment in 1922 as General Secretary of the Communist Party, and put him in a position where he could build his power base, especially when Lenin's health failed.
Mineral field depleted.
In his office in the Central Committee of the party, Stalin was
there's
able
no more
to
gas
quietly
with this
select
one.
the right people. People who would be indebted to him for their positions, and put them in places where they would be useful to him.
In 1922, Lenin suffered the first of several strokes. Stalin had hidden his ambition so well that Lenin only now began to recognize him as a rival.
Why on earth didn't Lenin, having picked Stalin to do all of these jobs that required so much confidence, so much ruthlessness, not tumble to the possibility earlier that those qualities might be useful? And I think the only conclusion you can draw about this is that Lenin was too arrogant to misuse. Never guessed that
The
anyone
minerals
that
have
he
up
had
and
promoted
gone.
would ever be able successfully to turn the table. But Stalin did.
Mineral field depleted.
Paralyzed, Lenin dictated his last testament to his wife, in which he attacked Stalin for being coarse and rude, and for abusing power. Many of Lenin's comrades now saw the war commissar, Leon Trotsky, not Stalin, as the obvious successor.
Our allies are
In
being
January
attacked.
1924, Lenin suffered his final stroke and died, giving Stalin the opportunity he had been waiting for. Now he could begin his
Our army
campaign
be
for
scrapped.
supreme power within the Communist Party. He set himself up as the high priest of the new cult of Lenin. At the same time, he singled out his rivals for destruction. But to seek mastery in the world where all men are equal required from the
Your
first
forces
his
are
special
under
gift
attack.
for inscrutability.
He always had this sort of mask at funerals. The mask was such that it was impossible to work out what he was thinking. His mask was always one and the same. He didn't smile. It was a face of stone. By his facial expressions, one couldn't tell if he was upset, happy,
The
or
minerals
enjoying
have
someone
up
else's
and gone.
misfortune.
Stalin was bitterly
Mineral
aware that
field
he lacked
depleted.
charisma. He had none of Hitler's mesmeric power when he spoke in
Help
public.
your friends.
But he was supremely skilled at the game of politics. He singled out Trotsky, his arch-rival, who had the presence and power of oratory he so lacked, and plotted his downfall.
Trotsky was able to speak beautifully and to speak magnificently in public. He was a very talented orator. Stalin's genius in achieving power lay in his remarkable ability to get one group of people to destroy the other. He began with getting the members of the Politburo to turn against Trotsky. Trotsky was driven out of the Politburo and expelled from the party. He was destroyed.
After the destruction of Trotsky, Stalin would turn against those in the Politburo who had helped him and destroy them too. Stealthily, but with absolute ruthlessness, the General Secretary of the Communist Party built up the complete and arbitrary power that has scarcely been equaled in modern times, except by one man, Adolf Hitler. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, not as he wished, as an outright victor at the polls, but as head of a coalition government. The task he had faced on the journey to power was very different from Stalin's. Stalin had manipulated a party and organization in place. Hitler had to create his from nothing. But like Stalin in Russia, many had underestimated the Führer, who used the same measure of cunning and manipulation to gain his ends. Germany's conservatives believed that once Hitler was in power, they'd be able to control him. They were as wrong as Stalin's comrades had been.
Hitler was a populist politician with a lot to prove. He didn't want to be yet another conservative. He wanted to be something radically different. Within a matter of 2 or 3 years, of course, he demonstrated to the conservatives that they would have profited a great deal by reading Mein Kampf.
Wenn wir sagen, dass in Deutschland mindestens 20 Millionen Menschen zeugen.
At the core of Hitler's power lay his ability to speak. Hitler's oratory connected him to the people and touched the wellsprings of their emotion. As a follower wrote,
Hitler responds to the vibration of the human heart with the delicacy of a seismograph or wireless receiving set, enabling him to act as a loudspeaker, proclaiming the most secret desires, the sufferings, and personal revolts of a whole nation.
Before starting a speech, Hitler would feel the mood of the audience. An orator, he said, receives continuous guidance from the people before whom he speaks. It was the combination of the build-up of emotion together with Hitler's theatrical gestures that gave the speeches their intense power.
Good luck, have fun, and beat him, probably.
Des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst auch Deutschland nicht geschenkt erhielten, sondern selbst schaffen mussten.
Hitler's speeches might have appeared spontaneous, but they were in fact carefully calculated.
The speech having ended, Hitler, Goebbels, and my father, of course, and I went into Hitler's office. And here he was, half an hour later, 35 minutes later, perfectly rational, recalling the effect that some of his statements had had, and instructing Goebbels to bring into sharp relief certain parts, leave others out, and so forth. I thought this was quite extraordinary.
Stalin's hold on power had little to do with his public speaking.
Stalin had a number of political talents, among which we can't really include oratory. To the end of his days, he spoke with a thick Georgian accent. He spoke with a lack of fluency. He did, however, had a sort of genial demeanor at party conferences. But it's inconceivable that he could have stood up at a Nazi rally, as Hitler did, and roused people to their feet.
Once in power, with his rivals dispersed, Hitler was confident of his position. Unlike Stalin, he rarely felt seriously threatened by those close to him, and was loyal to his henchmen to the end. Indeed, he only purged one senior member of the Nazi Party, Ernst Röhm, the leader of the stormtroopers, who was shot in 1934, along with 80 or so of his associates. It was a pragmatic move by Hitler to widen his support amongst the middle classes and army.
He was a revolutionary, and that's the right to purge the party. They do it everywhere. The so admired French Revolution was purging continuously and killing people, about 30,000 with the guillotine. No? So compared with that and what happened in Russia, Hitler was a Sunday school man.
Stalin was now supreme in Russia. Like Hitler, he had all the powers of a dictator. And like Hitler, he used them to impose an intensely personal vision. For Stalin, it was modernization. Nothing and no one was to stand in the way of its achievement.
Stalin always envisaged that the best quick route to a political solution was through a physical solution. If you've got a social group that's giving you trouble politically, eliminate it physically.
Ideologies need their enemies. Hitler's were outsiders, Jews, Marxists, gypsies and homosexuals. Stalin's were his own people, against whom he waged war in the name of the state. He regarded the Russian peasant class, especially the richer kulak smallholders, as rural capitalists holding back the revolution. Millions of peasants were uprooted from their homes and forced into collective farms and the new industrial cities. The result in the Ukraine, one of the most fertile regions on Earth, was starvation. 4 million are now estimated to have died.
Our allies' base is under attack!
In the history of mankind, there's never been anyone like Stalin. He was a devil.
Hey,
he wasn't a human being, nothing of the sort. Not even during the Inquisition, the reign of Nero.
Base is under attack!
Was there anything on the same scale of cruelty and purpose?
Stalin believed his drive to modernize the economy justified his claim to be the heir to Lenin. In a series of 5-year plans, he set impossible goals. The building of vast capital projects, canals, dams, railways, and the creation of entire new industries. Russia was brought into the modern age, but the advance was only made possible by slave labor. Stalin built the Gulag, his vast network of labor camps, on Lenin's foundations. The Solovki archipelago northwest of Archangel was the site of the first camp. It was set up many years before Hitler's concentration camps. Hundreds of thousands were held in this former monastery and its surrounding camps, many of them deported kulaks from the Ukraine. They labored on Stalin's roads and railways, and his pet project, the White Sea Canal.
Help your friends!
For those who entered here, there was no hope. Prisoners began their lives without provisions or tools, often even without shelter. Many would have died from cold in the first month.
Hey, they're attacking our base!
Originally,
Our allies
the prisoners
are being
had the
attacked.
possibility of working hard
help your
so as to cut
friends.
their sentences.
Our
But then
allies'
Stalin
base is
suggested
under
that
attack.
prisoners who
Upgrade is
worked
done.
well should not be released from the camps. In effect, the terms gradually began to increase. If at the beginning, the
Base is
prisoner was
under
given
attack.
3 years,
Our
the terms were
allies
then
are
increased
being
from
attacked.
5 to 10 and up to 25 years.
The images of Stalin's Gulag are less familiar than those of Hitler. Yet, with their watchtowers, barracks and barbed wire, they mirror the Nazi concentration camps. Both systems took a terrible toll of the camp populations. But the Gulag Stalin began at Solovki was to last for more than half a century and end only with the fall of communism.
Our allies' base is under attack. Complete. The minerals
The history
have
of the
our army
Gulag
be
is the
scrapped.
history of the country, and Solovki became the cancerous cell from which the whole tumor of the Gulag stemmed. The Solovki Guards were later put in charge of many camps throughout the whole country.
Our allies are being attacked.
Stalin's war on his
forces
people
are
took a
under attack.
devastating toll and corrupted his own personality. He spent much time in the Kremlin,
Our army be
working or
scrapped.
watching films, one of his few means of contact with the outside world.
Finished
He became
learning.
more and more isolated from the people he ruled. In the early years, his marriage had been relatively normal. But as time passed, his wife Nadezhda, always
Our
independent-minded,
allies are
became
being
upset
attacked.
by his brutal methods. "You're a torturer, that's what you are. You torture your wife," she said. "You torture the whole people until they can take no more." In November 1932, after Stalin drunkenly insulted her in public, she returned home and
Friendo's
took out the
base
gun
is
she
under
carried for her
attack.
personal protection.
Mineral field depleted. Your forces are under attack.
She shot herself in the heart. She didn't spoil her face.
Hey,
And so she lay in her
help your
coffin as if she
friends.
were alive. She looked very beautiful. When Stalin saw her, he said she left like an enemy.
Stalin forbade any mention of his wife's suicide
Base is
and
under
destroyed her
attack.
final note. He did not attend her funeral nor visit
Our
her
allies'
grave.
base is under attack. Our allies are being attacked.
The marriage of Stalin to Nadezhda Alliluyeva is a real tragedy.
Hey,
and
help
when
your
that
friends.
marriage ended with her suicide, really Stalin became a very cold, frigid man who, in revenge for any kind of slight towards him, was even harsher than he had been before.
Our army be scrapped.
Hitler's
The
relationship
minerals
with
have
women
up
could
and
be
gone.
equally destructive. He was both possessive and dismissive. His first love was his niece, Geli Raubal. It's unlikely that Hitler ever had sexual relations with her, but when he learnt of an affair
Mineral
she
field
had with his
upgrade is
driver,
done.
he exploded in rage. Geli was forbidden from seeing other men and pursuing her career. In September 1931, she shot herself in the heart with Hitler's handgun. He was devastated. It was an extraordinary parallel with the death of Stalin's wife.
What it showed, I think, were men who found it extremely difficult to let themselves. People who were desperate to get something back. But they were, in a sense, married.
Research complete.
I think they had much less to give to people in person.
Your forces are under attack. Hey, they're attacking our base.
Eva Braun, who worked as an assistant to Hitler's photographer, became the Führer's female companion for the rest of his life.
Base is under attack.
She was responsible for the home movies taken at Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof in Berchtesgaden. She did everything she could to gain his attention, even once attempting suicide herself.
She was 17 years old when she met him first time, and he was 23 years older, and he adored her, and she was happy to have a man who adored a little girl. It
Our
was no
allies
normal
are being
relationship.
attacked.
Hitler, like Stalin, kept his private life a secret. He hid Eva Braun from the German people. He told Albert Speer, within her hearing, that a highly intelligent man should take a primitive and stupid woman.
Hey,
he described his
your
own
friends.
female ideal as
Our
a cute,
allies are
cuddly,
being
naive
attacked.
little thing, tender, sweet, and stupid. Hitler had no family, yet he had a rapport with young children. And he could be charming just as Stalin could when it served
help
his
your
purpose.
friends.
But with adults, he was always aloof. Quite unlike Stalin, he was a teetotal vegetarian and a militant non-smoker who disapproved of raucous behavior. It was often said that he preferred the company of animals, a reflection, perhaps, of his disregard for human life.
I remember we went to look at the wonderful new buildings and what was planned, and Hitler adored this situation.
Hey, help
and
your
he
friends.
was with Speer, was present, of course, and they made plans and so on. We saw a man was coming, and he said, "I have a wish." And I said, "Well, tell me what
Our
is your
allies
wish?"
are being attacked.
And then he said, "Free beer for me and my friends."
Base is under attack.
He was annoyed, and he said to the agency, "Well, organize the people's man gets his free beer." After dinner in the garden, we started a discussion of whether animals have feelings and intelligence. And he had a wonderful conversation he liked very much. And then he said, "When I come home and my dog sees me, he's so glad. I know that he has a feeling. But this man today, he asked me beer. You see, this man has instinct, a human being. But my dog is better than the human beings like this man." And he was very much
help
upset.
your friends.
Hitler hated the petty routine of ruling. Unlike Stalin, he refused to read long state papers. At the Berghof, he would
Our
rise
allies
late
are
and
being
often do
attacked.
nothing all day. It was as if the mind-numbing routine of his private
Friendo's
life
base
was used
is
to
under
build up
attack.
reserves for his manic
Hey,
obsessions,
they're attacking
the
our
pursuit
base.
of war and conquest, and his triumphal public appearances.
Hey, help your friends.
Adolf Hitler was energized by the adulation of the people. It was his lifeblood.
Our
It was when
allies
on the
are being
podium
attacked.
addressing a rally fully immersed in the cult of the Führer that he seemed to find and reinforce his true identity. And he seemed to satisfy a deep-seated emotional need in the Germans. He was a vessel into which they poured their own national longings. For his part, the cult of the Führer, symbolized in the theatrical displays of power at Nuremberg, gave him identity and utterly convinced him of the supremacy of his will.
Hitler was a showman. Hitler liked it when his arm was stretched out. During the rallies, he would simply stretch it out like a brilliant dancer. He liked to appear on the screen in the evening in front of the people. He liked these huge parades and auditoriums. But Stalin would sit in his Kuncevo dacha, and he would work and work and work.
Joseph Stalin was always on his guard. Working alone at his Kuncevo dacha, at his desk day and night, he was nicknamed Comrade Card Index. He showed a diligence which Hitler lacked completely, and that was the key to his power. As time passed, his paranoia increased. He became distrustful of all those around him, even closest colleagues and friends. Aware of how effectively he had dispatched others, Stalin put faith only in himself. In 1934, at the 17th Party Congress, Stalin's suspicions focused on his old comrade Sergei Kirov, the leader of the Leningrad Party. Kirov was everything that Stalin was not. Charismatic, handsome, warm and outgoing, popular in the party. To make matters worse, he opposed the pace and methods of Stalin's revolution.
Сталин его считал конкурентом, и он боялся Кирова, потому что он боялся...
Stalin considered Kirov to be a rival and was afraid of him because of his popularity among the people. At the 17th Party Congress, in the elections for the General Secretary, Kirov won. Stalin faked the results, but Kirov wasn't really trying to become General Secretary, and he went back off to Leningrad and worked there.
10 months after the Congress, Sergei Kirov was assassinated in Leningrad. It is still unknown whether Stalin was responsible, but Kirov's death gave him the excuse he needed to start his Great Terror. Stalin ordered a full state funeral for his former friend and appeared as the chief mourner. His daughter later wrote,
"When the facts convinced my father that someone he knew well had turned out badly after all, this was where his cruel, implacable nature showed itself. The past ceased to exist for him. Years of friendship and fighting side by side in a common cause might as well have never been."
More often than not, he used to be burying his own victims, who were killed according to his orders. He had this principle. He used to say, if there's a person, there's a problem. No person, no problem.
Stalin's show trials began. Disagreement with the leader on any issue, however trivial, had become a capital crime for which there was only one sentence: death. Former friends and associates of Stalin confessed under torture to the most extraordinary crimes. Confessions which they then repeated to Stalin's notorious prosecutor, Andrei Vyshinsky.
Stalin never forgot those who had opposed him in the past, and he settled scores with them. The show trials are the classic example of this. The show trials were also an important means of propaganda, of convincing the Soviet public that there really were enemies everywhere, even at the highest level of the party.
The state prosecutor, Vyshinsky, and his victims were reading from a script. Stalin had carefully stage-managed every last detail of the charade. He even had a secret vantage point from which he could follow the proceedings, and seems to have taken a sadistic delight in the humiliation of his victims.
My idea of a perfect day is to plan a beautiful revenge on an enemy, carry it out, and then go home peacefully to bed.
I believed in this.
Good luck and
Many
have
other
fun.
people believed. There was belief in Stalin then. It had to be either or. And at that time, you could either believe in Stalin and not doubt, or not believe in Stalin and become one of those people who were sent to prison and shot. It was not a difficult choice.
Stalin personally signed execution orders for 41,000 men and women. But there were many more victims of his terror in the 30s. Millions of Soviet citizens were arrested, hundreds of thousands of whom were shot. By 1939, there were more than 2 million who had been transported to the camps, many of whom died. Hitler's actions in this period pale by comparison. His horrors were still to come. In the Soviet Union in the late 30s, Stalin, unlike Hitler, rarely mingled with the masses. He had a paranoid fear of assassination. Stalin was remote, but ever present in the people's lives. A godlike figure, all-seeing and all-powerful. He was called Vozhd, the boss. When his mother had asked him what he did, he told her, "I'm a bit like a Tsar." Certainly the people saw him as such.
It was a curious combination of deathly horror and naive credulity on the part of the people. Most believed in him as they would their own father, the wise leader of the people, and so on.
народов и так далее, и так далее.
Adolf Hitler was also at the height of his powers. In the spring of 1938, his troops marched into Austria, bringing about the union of Germany with the country of his birth. He too had become a god, a mythical figure for his people, always more popular and separate from the Nazi party he led. But unlike Stalin, it was his spellbinding physical presence which captivated the masses. Hitler and Stalin were absolute masters in their own domains, and as the balance of power in Europe shifted, they began warily to circle each other. "I have read a book on Stalin," Hitler said. "He is a tremendous personality who took the whole of that gigantic country firmly in his iron grasp."
Both dictators were very aware of the other. They gazed at each other across Europe. They wondered what the other was like, what made the other tick, what was his grip on his people like. And the few glimpses we have, both from Hitler and from Stalin, show that there was something like a mutual admiration between them, and they both respected the fact that they had come from very humble backgrounds and had triumphed against all the odds to lead great powers.
Following the annexation of Austria, Hitler continued to expand the Third Reich. In 1939, he began to eye his next target, Poland.
В Москву прибыл министр иностранных дел Германии господин Йоахим фон Риббентроп.
In a move of supreme cynicism but calculated logic, so typical of both tyrants, the two opposing camps now locked in a deadly embrace. In the summer of 1939, Hitler sent his foreign minister, von Ribbentrop, to Moscow to sign a non-aggression pact with Stalin. The advantages were clear to both.
Complete.
Hitler was free to attack Poland, and Stalin, weakened by a purge of the military command, gained time to build up his defenses. Ribbentrop wanted a preamble to the pact outlining the mutual respect of the two nations. Stalin refused. After 6 years pouring buckets of filth over one another, it's too late to expect our peoples to believe all is forgiven and forgotten, he said. After the signing, he told his staff, "I know what Hitler's up to. He thinks he's outsmarted me. But actually it is I who has outsmarted him." Events were to show how wrong he was.
Our allies'
Pact with
base
the
is
enemy
under
plunged
attack.
the world into war and sealed Poland's fate.
Our allies are
A secret
being
agreement
attacked.
between the dictators divided Poland between them. For those living under the new regimes, there was little to distinguish one from the other. A terrible symmetry emerged between the two occupied
Help your
territories.
friends.
Am 18. Tage des Feldzuges trafen sich bei Brest-Litovsk die deutschen Truppen mit den aus Osten anrückenden Formationen der Sowjetunion.
Stalin attempted to do the same thing that he'd already done in
allies
Russia.
are being
He
attacked.
supported the kulaks. He shot intellectual and political leaders, and he Sovietized countries. Similarly, Hitler, in moving into Poland, set about
Upgrade
an even more
complete.
ruthless extermination of the Jews, eradication of the Jews, than had already taken place in Germany.
Hey, help your friends.
To take place in early summer. All the while, Stalin was convinced that Hitler would not attack, despite the intelligence he was receiving.
Ну, а вот перед даже войной, накануне войны, он не верил.
When the war began, he didn't believe reports saying that Hitler's army had approached the border from Murmansk to Odessa. That couldn't be hidden. There were reports from spies, ambassadors and deserters. He didn't believe anyone. Paradoxically, he only trusted one person, and that was Hitler.
Base is under attack!
Но он поверил в Гитлера.
When Stalin was first told of the German bombing of Russia, his response was confident. Hitler knows nothing about it for sure, he said. What is needed is urgently to contact Berlin. He soon learned the awful truth. Hitler's betrayal was to throw him into turmoil. He retreated to his dacha and did nothing as German forces advanced. Even after the war, he would shake his head and say, "Together with the Germans, we would have been invincible."
Your upgrade is done. Our allies
It took
are
Stalin
being
some
attacked.
time to recover his composure. On the 30th of June 1940, he returned to the Kremlin and took charge once more, addressing the Russian people.
Our allies are being attacked.
Now that the two dictators were at war, their utter conviction and absolute ruthlessness would ensure a new type of war and lead inevitably to genocide.
This really was a turning point. Both sides came to see it that way, a struggle to the death between two colossal historical figures. And the two figures, of course, who were determined in the end to win at all costs, all human costs. The struggle very quickly
help your
assumed
friends.
this level of extraordinary brutality and barbarism.
Adolf Hitler remained supremely confident of victory as he visited his troops close to
Our
the Eastern
allies
Front.
are being attacked.
He regarded the Slavs as subhumans to be exterminated and believed that the whole communist edifice was rotten to the core. He told the Italian dictator Mussolini,
I feel spiritually free again.
Help your friends.
Partnership with the Soviet Union
allies'
seemed to me
base
to
is
be a
under
break with
attack.
my whole origin. I am happy now to be relieved of these mental agonies.
but the strategy was misconceived, a product of Hitler's hubristic belief in his own omnipotence.
Hey, help your friends.
The German forces
Friends
were
of
ill-prepared
allies
for the
under
Russian
attack.
winter. They became overextended in the vastness of the Soviet territories. And the Führer's policy of a race war against Jews and Slavs meant that he failed to
help your
gain the support of
friends.
many in the Soviet Union who hated Stalin. As the tide turned against him, Hitler observed Stalin's strength partly lay in his readiness to take measures nobody else would consider. Stalin is half beast, half giant, he said. To the social side of life, he is utterly indifferent. The people can rot for all he cares. 25 million Russians perished fighting Hitler.
Stalin could always say to Hitler, as it were, you lose 1 million, we'll lose 1 million. And we'll do this right down to the bottom line.
Your
and in the
forces
end,
are under
we're
attack.
bound to win, because we can afford to lose more aeroplanes, more tanks than you can. We can afford to lose more factories than you can. In the end, there won't be any Germans left. But then there'll still be lots
Add-on
of Russians.
complete.
And that was the way
Add-on
this man
complete.
fought the war.
Even when the war was clearly lost, Hitler himself had no qualms about genocide. The extermination camps in the East continued their murderous work. After the defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler withdrew from public gaze, and his relationship with the German people weakened. Failure made him
Command
a
center
diminished
upgrade
figure.
complete.
Hey, they're
Das ist
attacking
der
our
Schauplatz
base.
des verbrecherischen Anschlages, den ein kleiner Kreis gewissenloser Offiziere am 20. Juli auf den Führer und auf den Stab der Wehrmachtführung verübte.
In July 1944, a bomb detonated under a table came close to killing Hitler. He retreated further from view. Like Stalin, he had a deep fear of assassination, with reason. There were 43 attempts on his life. 200 of those who plotted to kill Hitler were arrested by the Gestapo, interrogated, tortured, and put on trial in the Berlin People's Court. It was Hitler's version of Stalin's show trials.
Ein neuer Verhandlungstag beginnt.
Frendo's
The
base
People's
is
Judge,
under
Roland
attack.
Friesler, had learned his trade in Russia, where for a time he'd been a Bolshevik. Friesler used the same abusive and bullying style of cross-examination that Stalin's prosecutor, Wyszynski, had employed in the show trials. Hitler ordered that no mercy be shown, adding, "Friesler will take care of things all right. He's our Wyszynski."
Our allies' base is under attack.
200 were sentenced to death. 5,000 were sent to concentration camps.
Hey, they're attacking our base. Frendo's base is under attack.
The leading plotters were executed by slow hanging with a piano wire noose attached to a meat hook. Hitler, it was claimed, watched a film of the execution, but there's no evidence of this. Contrary to popular belief, neither he nor Stalin had a stomach for the many cruelties that they inflicted.
I think if Hitler had come face to face with that reality, if he'd been taken on a...
Your forces are under attack.
He would have found it extremely difficult to confront.
Our allies
Stalin,
are being
too,
attacked.
of course, found it very difficult to confront the reality of the horrible war he was waging. He made one brief staged visit to the front. It lasted only a matter of hours, and he scurried back to Moscow to make sure that he wasn't exposed to any
help your friends.
personal danger.
Our allies' base is under attack.
As the Russian and Allied forces came ever nearer
Our
to Berlin,
allies are being
Hitler
attacked.
ordered his staff not to negotiate with Stalin. "If I settled with Russia today," he said,
help
"I'd
your
only come to
friends.
grips with her
Our
again
allies'
tomorrow.
base
I
is
just
under
can't help
attack.
it."
Whereas Hitler consistently ignored the advice of his generals and overrode them,
Our
Stalin
allies are being
learned from his
attacked.
mistakes.
Frendo's base is
There
under
is
attack.
a dialogue
Hey,
between him and his
help your
generals,
friends.
which proves more and more fruitful. And ultimately, of
Base
course,
is
the
under
Soviet
attack.
Union,
Allies' base
wins
is under
its great
attack.
victory and destroys Nazi power on the Eastern Front, and plays the
Frendo's
largest part
base
in
is under
the
attack.
military defeat of the Third Reich.
Our
In March
allies are being
1945,
attacked.
the Führer appeared for the last time in public as he gave bravery awards to Hitler Youth in Berlin. The strain of war had aged him
Frendo's base
prematurely.
is under attack.
He seemed much older than his 56 years.
Hey, help your friends.
1 month later, Russian
Our
soldiers
allies'
advanced
base
through the
is
ruins
under
towards
attack.
Hitler's bunker. In his final testament, Hitler had no gratitude for the German people whom he had led to destruction. Instead, he acknowledged the Slavic people as the new master race whose resilience and fighting power had brought them to the gates of Berlin. On the 30th of April 1945, he committed suicide
Our
with
allies
Eva
are
Braun.
being attacked.
He was a very broken man. I don't think it was part of him to die.
They're attacking our base.
I saw Hitler slumped against the door, slumped by the table, and Eva with her knees drawn up, lying next to him on the
Base is
sofa.
under attack. Hey, our allies
The
are
body
being
of Adolf
attacked.
Hitler, wrapped in blankets, was taken out of the emergency exit and placed in a bomb crater. Petrol was poured over him, and he was burnt.
Frendo's base is under attack. Base is under attack. Our allies' base is under attack. Hey, they're attacking our base. Our allies are being attacked. Hey, help your friends.
Gegen den Bolschewismus kämpfend für Deutschland gefallen ist.
When Stalin heard the news that Hitler had shot himself, he exclaimed, "Now he's done it, the bastard. Too bad he couldn't have been taken alive."
Our allies are being attacked.
With Hitler dead and the war
Our
over,
army be-
Stalin
our
was more
allies' base
powerful
is
than
under
ever.
attack.
Товарищ Сталин,
base is under
The
attack.
cult of personality reached new heights. The people genuinely revered Stalin as the savior of his country in the fight against fascism. He was called the dear leader, the great helmsman, and the universal genius.
Help your friends. Base is under
The destruction of the arch-enemy, Nazism, led to no softening in Stalin's attitude. The labor camps continued to expand, and he remained as paranoid as ever. As one colleague said, a man goes to Stalin as a friend, but he doesn't know where he will be sent next, home or to jail. Wives of colleagues and members of his own family were now sent to the camps or even shot. And Stalin remained as obsessive as ever about the smallest details.
Friendo's base is under attack.
Зазвонил телефон.
Our allies' base is under attack.
The phone rang. I picked it up and heard, "Please hold the line. Shortly, Comrade Stalin is going to speak with you."
Friendo's base
I
is
stood up.
under attack.
Or more to the point, my own legs forced me to stand. A few seconds later, I heard that familiar voice. He did not greet me, but got straight to the point and said, "Yesterday, Comrade Zhdanov spoke to you about a certain
Friendo's
cartoon."
base is under attack. Our allies are being attacked. Our allies' base is under
The
attack.
Cold War had started. Stalin ordered a cartoon lampooning American plans to station troops in the Arctic. But he was unhappy with the caption and inserted his own words.
Hey, help your friends.
To understand how Stalin, with the global scale of his affairs and his work and his power, still managed to find the time to change the text underneath my picture, is astonishing and incomprehensible.
In 1949, the Soviet Union celebrated Stalin's 70th birthday. Despite his murderous cynicism, he still craved the worship and adulation of the masses. The deification continued. Khrushchev, who was to succeed Stalin, described him then as even more capricious, irritable and brutal. His suspicion, he said, grew to unbelievable proportions. Stalin's appearances in public were now rare and carefully stage-managed. He gave up making speeches, desperate, like Hitler, to hide the ravages of time and the strains of leadership. The similarities with Hitler continued. He became infected with a paranoid anti-Semitism, born of a resentment against Jewish intellectuals. Measures were taken against Jews in all walks of life.
He was a very ruthless man, and when people were giving him a problem, perhaps an ethnic group such as the Jews, he tended to turn to very drastic measures. And there's good reason to think that he was about to deport all the Jews from Russia and Ukraine into eastern Siberia.
As Stalin grew older, he became lonely and desolate, fearing death always. Like an ancient tyrant, he insisted that all food be tasted before eating. Khrushchev overheard him mutter to himself, "I'm finished. I don't trust anyone, not even myself." Stalin spent more and more time closeted in his dacha, watching his colleagues make fools of themselves as they drank and danced into the night. He was as feared as ever. So much so that when he suffered a stroke on the 28th of February 1953, none dared approach him or call a doctor for nearly 12 hours. His death was agonizing and prolonged. Despite Stalin's crimes, his death came as a hammer blow to the Soviet people. Many seemed almost to believe in his immortality. Like Hitler, Stalin left no successor. Like Hitler, he believed none worthy to come after him. Before his death, he had said to the party, "You are blind like young kittens. What will happen without me? The country will perish." To this day, despite his tyranny, Stalin retains a place in the heart of the Russian people, a strong leader who brought order and industry to the country, and who, in the words of the poet Pushkin on Peter the Great, raised Russia on its hind legs with his iron curb. But the dark stain of brutality remains.
It was a difficult and unimaginable time of suffering, and to remember it is difficult. How could we suffer so much? But we suffered. How we suffered.
Hitler and Stalin still cast their long shadow over the modern world. Many millions died this century under their rule. Of the two, Hitler remains the more obvious personification of human evil. Stalin is still judged less harshly. The true scale of his persecutions and cruelty have only recently emerged. And for some, there remains a crucial distinction between the ends to which the two dictators worked.
Stalin was, unlike Hitler, never in favor of a specific policy of genocide, of wiping out an entire people as an act of state policy. Millions of people did die under Stalin, but most of them died of starvation, mistreatment, overwork. They were sent to camps, of course. But Hitler and the regime set out deliberately to isolate, discriminate against, and finally to exterminate whole groups of people on the basis of a warped biological, historical view. And they did so, of course, fully conscious of everything they were doing.
But perhaps the final judgment owes less to comparisons between the scale of the dictator's wickedness and more to the shared roots of their evil. Both men early on wiped their hands of human compassion. "One death is a tragedy," said Stalin. "A million is a statistic." Conscience, Hitler remarked, is a Jewish invention.
This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Good luck and have fun.
You're gonna need it.
Following the humiliation of defeat, Germany between World War I and World War II was a country that had lost its sense of purpose, its status in the world, had seen revolution and poverty brought about by the Wall Street crash of 1929. By 1933, it was a country that longed for strong leadership that would restore law, order, and a sense of identity. One man understood the needs of the German people and presented himself as a savior in a world that was on the brink of collapse. He knew also how to manipulate the images that the public saw so that he would appear always as a man apart, a man chosen, possessing a monumental, almost magical quality that drew the hopes and trust of the German population. The cameras followed his every move. He fed the popular desire for an invincible symbol of national pride in a way no politician had ever been able to. His rise from a rabble-rouser on the streets of Bavaria to the pinnacle of power in Berlin and conquest of most of Western Europe is one of the most extraordinary and savage stories of our time. Millions of Germans saw in him the Messiah he felt himself to be, and followed him at first blindly and then under increasing duress into destruction, unable to comprehend that they were simply numbers in his distorted vision of the world, dispensable to a man incapable of forming fulfilling personal relationships. One of the most fascinating questions in the history of the 20th century is how did Adolf Hitler come to create a regime that would hold the world in a grip of terror the likes of which had never been seen
help
before.
your friends. Our allies are being attacked. Hey, help your friends. Our allies are being attacked. Our allies' base is under attack.
At the time of Adolf Hitler's birth, his mother was staying in an inn, the Gasthof zum Pommer at Braunau am Inn in Austria. He was born at 6:30 in the evening of the 20th of April 1889, the fourth of 6 children of Alois and Clara Hitler.
Help your friends.
Alois had been an
Frendo's
illegitimate
base is
child
under attack.
and had taken his mother's name, Schickelgruber, for the first 39 years of his life. In 1886, he adopted the surname of his stepfather, Johann Georg Hiedler. Clara was his third wife, and only 2 of the children, Adolf and Paula, survived the difficult early years and lived into adulthood. There was strong affection between them, as she reported later, and bickering. Adolf's father was financially comfortable, as he worked for the Imperial Customs Service as a government official. He was devoted to duty, pompous, proud of his status, and strict with himself and others. Adolf was frequently beaten by him. "I never loved my father," Hitler said later in life, adding unsurprisingly that he was afraid of him and his terrible temper, and recalling that he counted silently the blows of the stick once he had resolved never to cry again when being whipped. It is easy to find the boy in the man who would demand unflinching obedience from his new super race. He was not a good student, and despite his father wanting his son to follow his career path as a customs official, Adolf was more interested in art. He was considered lazy, except when reading and talking about his war books. Then his enthusiasm was plain to see. The relationship with his mother was entirely different. She was a kind and devout Roman Catholic who adored and supported her son, as he also adored her. In 1903, his father died of a lung hemorrhage. Freed from the long years of parental abuse, he was now no longer able to be disciplined and was expelled from school, which he eventually left aged 16 with no qualifications. In 1905, Hitler moved to Vienna to become a painter, living partly on the money given by his mother. He was twice rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts as being untalented and unfit for painting, but with the encouragement that his talents lay in the architectural profession. Despite the bitterness he felt at the refusal, this encouragement gave him a belief in his talent as an architect that stayed with him, and later his architect Albert Speer became one of his closest advisors.
If you love history, then you'll love History Hit. Our extensive library of documentary features everything from the ancient origins of our earliest ancestors to the daring mission to sink the Bismarck. History Hit has hundreds of exclusive documentaries with unrivaled access to the world's best historians. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Timeline fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code TIMELINE at checkout.
Your forces are under attack.
He began to paint pictures from postcards in an attempt to earn his living as an artist to supplement the financial help from his mother. He did sell some of his paintings. When he first arrived in the Austrian capital, Hitler was aged 18. He was overwhelmed by the opulence of the hotels, villas, shops, and the architectural splendor that surrounded him. He went to the opera and the theater. Clara Hitler was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 47, and Adolf stayed by her side during the final stage of the illness. The family doctor said that he had never seen a closer attachment by a son, adding that Adolf Hitler was the saddest man he had ever seen.
The minerals have up and gone.
Clara died just before Christmas 1907.
Mineral
Following the
field
death of his
depleted.
mother, Hitler returned to Vienna, but he was excluded from the life of the city. His mother's death and his own failings sent him into depression, and by 1909 he was walking the streets and sleeping in the open. He finally found shelter living in a men's hostel for the homeless. Whilst he was there, he began to earn a modest income from the sale of his paintings of old Vienna. The society that Hitler aspired to join was ruled over by an aging emperor, Franz Joseph, emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He had been on the throne for 60 years and symbolized the divisions of a society where money separated the workers even from the middle classes. Hitler watched street marches taking place as the red flag was carried through Vienna. The sight of these made the young Hitler depressed, and he feared for the future. Austria, as part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was also a society where the German population felt under threat by Slavic races. The Catholic Church seemed also to favour the Slavs, with the result that a distrust and dislike for the Catholic religion was widespread amongst Germans. The desire for a united German fatherland was strong. Vienna's population was growing, and amongst the mix of races to be found there was a large Jewish community. Their presence, their strange appearance, caused unease amongst the middle classes. He would not have been alone in sensing dislike of these strange figures with their market stalls, even though he expressed lifelong gratitude to the Jewish doctor, Eduard Bloch, who attended his mother. By his own account, the more I saw, the more sharply they became distinguished in my eyes from the rest of humanity. Whether Hitler came across the works of the Englishman Houston Stewart Chamberlain in Vienna is uncertain, but his book, The Foundations of the 19th Century, which he wrote in German, was very popular in Germany at the time, which was hardly surprising as Chamberlain maintained that the German race should be dominant in the world. The Germans were, he argued, the most highly gifted of the Aryan group of peoples, and the Aryans are preeminent amongst all peoples, and therefore the lords of the world. He pointed out the racial differences of the Jews, and spoke in derogatory terms of them, warning that racial mixing would mean moral and physical degeneration and the end of Aryan world power. Jews and other racial aliens had to be removed from Germany, he argued. Chamberlain had a particular influence on Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazis' philosopher. Hitler and Goebbels expressed the desire for a cult of race, blood and battle once the final victory had been achieved.
Our army be scrapped.
His thinking now thoroughly tainted, sensing himself an outcast, Hitler was still in the hostel when, in 1913, he inherited the remaining money from his father's estate and moved to Munich in time to avoid conscription for the imminent First World War. His fierce interest in all things German meant that he did not want to fight for Austria. To many people, the Jews represented the grasping capitalism that brought about poverty and the unfairness of democracy.
Research complete.
A war to re-establish the world order seemed desirable. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo on June the 28th, 1914, the war everyone wanted was just months away. The Germans mobilized on the 30th of July. Hitler was eagerly ready to fight when World War I hostilities broke out in August. He volunteered to join a Bavarian regiment, the 16th Infantry Reserve Regiment, recording later that he had been gripped with stormy enthusiasm, fallen to his knees with an overflowing heart to thank God for the good fortune of being permitted to live at the time. It was probably bureaucratic oversight that allowed him into the German army. Officially, he should have been returned to Austria as a foreigner.
Mineral field depleted.
On the 29th of October 1914, Hitler's regiment was engulfed in the battles at Ypres. With 70% losses, his enthusiasm waned. In Mein Kampf, Hitler did not mention that he was in fact a dispatch runner from the first day on, and not an infantryman in the trenches. His luck, however, was already in evidence when a shell exploded in the regimental HQ minutes after he had left, almost wiping out the entire staff.
Hey, help your friends!
His comrades found Hitler strange as he sat for hours in a corner reading or brooding. Despite his lack of humour and the fact that he never joined in with the usual moans or jibes, he generally got on well with those around him. His defence of all things German was fanatical. He would come to passionate life when talking of a new Germany, but his comrades were drawn in as he persuasively described his vision of an Austria reunited with the fatherland, in which foreigners and democracy had been removed. Most of his listeners were in agreement. In the 36 battles that he would take part in, he earned a reputation for great personal courage. A senior officer described him as an exceptionally brave, effective and conscientious soldier.
Our allies' base is under attack!
He was promoted to Lance Corporal in November 1914. Although he was never to progress further because he was not considered to be leadership material by his superior officers, although he did receive the Iron Cross Second Class that year for rescuing his deputy commanding officer under fire. In late 1960, a shell exploded near the runner's dugout, injuring him in the thigh. The others beside him were also wounded or killed. He spent 2 months in hospital near Berlin. On a visit to Munich, he was shocked. Morale was low, he wrote later, and every clerk seemed to be a Jew. In 1918, he received the Iron Cross First Class, an award seldom given to a corporal. It was probably not awarded for capturing 15 French soldiers single-handedly, as he claimed later, but for bravery in delivering important dispatches in over 4 years at the front. And even then, he had to badger the regimental commander for weeks to get it. Ypres night of October the 13th, 1918, a mustard gas attack near Ypres partially blinded him. His war was over. During his recovery in northeastern Germany, he learned of capitulation at the front in France and revolution on the German streets. Workers in Berlin had been on strike to protest at the continuing war and against democratic institutions. For him, ending the war was the greatest villainy of the century. Did all this happen so that a bunch of wretched criminals could lay hands on the fatherland? He wrote. The shame of indignation and disgrace burned my brow. Hatred grew in me, hatred for those responsible for this deed. Those responsible were, in his eyes, the politicians of the democratic Weimar Republic, socialists and communists for the industrial strikes in the arms factories, and Jews, who it was said, quite wrongly, had not supported the war. He would later make them all suffer for their assumed treachery. Hitler, along with many others, felt that Germany had been stabbed in the back. The legend of the Dolchstoß was born.
Help your friends!
Socialists and Bolsheviks agitating for strikes, and especially Jews, were held responsible for the German defeat. The Jews were considered unpatriotic, a claim that was completely unfounded. Hitler wrote, "My own fate became known to me, and I decided to go into politics."
Our allies are being attacked.
Hitler had, it seemed, decided that he was the only one able to save Germany. After the war, chaos came to the streets of Germany. Hitler was stunned by what was taking place. Anti-war sentiment and revolution had gripped Germany. The democratically elected Chancellor, Philipp Scheidemann, refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles and resigned. The signing of the treaty finally took place under the chancellorship of Gustav Bauer on June the 28th, 1919. When the Kaiser abdicated on November the 9th, 1918, and fled to Holland, a power vacuum arose, and there was mutiny, fighting in the streets. The unrest was fanned by the Versailles Treaty and the reparations demanded by the Allies from Germany that kept it financially weak. In Bavaria, the revolutionary fever was at its greatest, with revolutionaries thinking themselves on the edge of a new world order. The Freikorps, paramilitary gangs set up by former army officers and made up of demobbed soldiers, angered at the sudden defeat in the war, were sent to quell the communist unrest, break up the workers' councils, and put down risings by communists.
The minerals have up and gone.
The army had taught them that obedience and martial law was the way to ensure stability, and they intended to impose that attitude on peacetime Germany. Walter Rathenau, foreign minister, was accused by an obscure extreme right-wing party, the German Workers' Party, of being part of a Jewish communist conspiracy, and was assassinated by ultra-nationalist officers. Friedrich Ebert, a social democrat, took over as chancellor, supported by the army and the Freikorps, which now crushed the burgeoning revolution and brought order back to the country. This was an uneasy grip on power, and few people felt loyal to the government. Hitler was 30 when he returned to Munich. The future as a civilian frightened him, and he was open to the influence of the unrest and uncertainty of the post-war era. He managed to stay in the army, only being demobbed on the 31st of March 1920, and he supported the ideals of the Freikorps duty. Before long, he had been chosen by his army superiors to be a political instructor and was sent to be trained by the Education and Propaganda Department.
Help your friends.
His ability to make effective public speeches quickly became apparent, and mindful of this talent, he was sent by the Reichswehr, the German army, to observe and infiltrate the meetings of revolutionary groups.
Hey, they're attacking our base.
On one of his undercover missions in September 1919, he was sent to listen to an extreme right-wing nationalist group that met in one of the Munich beer cellars. This was the same German Workers' Party that had agitated against Walter Rathenau.
Hey, help your friends.
Far from decrying them, he agreed with their anti-Semitic nationalist sentiment. Hitler had found his ideological home. On the 12th of September 1919, he gave his first speech to the gathered adherents of the party. Its success can be seen in the fact that he was invited to join the committee. There were perhaps 40 members at the time, and such men as Hitler were always useful. He was a byproduct of German history, filled with helpless anger and shame at Germany's degradation, and this angry passion soon swept up his listeners. He had wanted to create a party of his own, but within months Adolf Hitler had ousted the original party founder and was leader of the German Workers' Party. Here he was to meet Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, two men who stayed loyal to him throughout the lifetime of the Third Reich. Although Hitler suggested the name